Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Backtrekking, the podcast where we look back at the real-world inspirations behind classic episodes of Star Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Caliban, and the Romulans are in trouble because the Federation eats pieces of shit like them for breakfast. I'm joined on this episode by my co-host.
Hey, I'm Gooey Fame, and I'm looking out for my dog, I guess.
We have always saved the dog. We've returned to explore the stories behind your favorite Trek shows, and we're back today to talk about two sci-fi tales featuring desperate battles and closed time-like curves. It's the 1980 film The Final Countdown and the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Yesterday's Enterprise.
Ooh, they're so similar.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that they are in a lot of ways. I'm going to go into my usual, talking about how, no, guys, really, come back. This is a real thing. But I do think that they are really connected, and we'll talk about some of the ways that they are later. I think it's funny, though, that The Final Countdown is a film that I think no one remembers. It's really the Europe song you think of when you hear The Final Countdown at this point, or maybe Arrested Development. But Yesterday's Enterprise, now more than 30 years on, is probably one of the premier Star Trek episodes, and I think what a lot of people think of when they think of Star Trek of this era.
Right, yeah. And I think there's a reason for that. I mean, we'll talk about it more, I guess, when we talk about the episodes, but I really enjoyed the movie, but I think the episode does its premise a little bit better, I think.
I don't disagree, and there are a couple reasons for that we'll get into when we talk about both of these works of art, let's say. Let's be really generous in this case. But let's talk about the news in Star Trek, which we often do at this point in the show. And there isn't a ton of news to talk about. You and I were talking about Strange New Worlds before we heated the mics up, and it is a news item that Paramount Plus has finally launched in the UK. It's available to British and Irish viewers, amongst others, so they could finally see some of that Strange New Worlds and get their other shows, if they haven't seen them yet, directly from Paramount Plus.
Yeah. I had forgotten that was unavailable.
There was the Netflix deal going for a while, where they could see the first couple seasons of Discovery and some of the other shows there, but now they have access to everything. And the rollout, as these things go, hasn't been completely smooth, but I think it's starting to settle itself down now.
Well, welcome to all UK people.
Absolutely. It's interesting because as English speakers, although, they're in foreign countries, foreign to America, you get the brunt of it. I'm sure if French fans are unhappy with Paramount Plus's offerings or with Star Trek, I don't really hear about it because I'm not getting the French comments and results in social media. But I always hear from UK and Commonwealth listeners about the state of streaming Star Trek in their areas, and it's generally not usually very good.
Right. There was some hubbub recently, right? This year. People were really upset, yeah.
Yeah, because, of course, Paramount goes full court press on getting people excited about their shows, and then you've got a bunch of, English-speaking fans that are like, yeah, we don't get that, though. So if you're on social media, you'll get somebody saying, man, I can't wait for this and this, and, 2, 3, maybe 4 posts down, in the comments, it'll be like, oh, that sounds great, but it's not for me. I'm not going to be able to watch that.
I sort of get it. It'd be kind of strange, because you were just talking about, if, I don't know, say the French got Star Trek Discovery first for whatever reason, and they're talking about it. Even if they're talking about it, I'm like, okay, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't see this stuff. But yeah, if I did just see a bunch of people talking about in English, and I can understand what they're talking about, I'd be a little oh, dang.
I really wish that they would get on the stick as far as this, as far as translating things on the internet go. I think that we don't think about the fact, and it's natural because we don't often talk to, at least in America, we don't often talk to people who aren't speaking English, but there's a whole wide, wonderful internet out there. And the promise of the internet and the World Wide Web was that we would be able to talk to anybody. And sure, there's Google Translate or something like that, that can fairly easily and with a good amount of clarity give you an idea of what somebody's trying to say. But
Yeah.
all the content is still siloed, and so Facebook is American Facebook for the most part. You can kind of find ways to get to other people's pages and digital localities of other countries, but like Facebook, Google, if you search on Google, it's just going to give you results related to the IP address and the location that you're coming from. I found this out, working on a podcast about anime in Sailor Moon, is that often we are looking for results because we're researching topics, about Japanese culture and society. And you have to kind of like, boom, you got to kind of kick Google, in the side and get it to sort of flip over to find foreign language results, which then you can translate back, to get actual sources. But usually it's just like, yeah, this is just what white people are saying about whatever you're looking for. And it's like, that's not always what I want.
Yeah, that's cool. Like trying, that is funny. I know that I know that some experience from like one of my friends' websites for The Legend of Zelda, where they have there's there used to be all these different fan sites, and there's some that are just French or whatever, but it's like, yeah, we know about them, but like we never communicate, and it's like, that is strange, right?
Especially when we have the technology to I think ameliorate that problem. But especially in something like Trek, like the subject of Trek, like it is an international thing. It's something that appeals to just about everybody, which itself is a conversation, I think, because of how I think American-centric that it tends to be. But I think the ideals behind it are something that appeal to everybody. And so, yeah, like get a universaltranslator.com going, or like some enterprising Trek fan should take the lead on this and try to develop some way for Trek fans of all stripes, all countries and languages to be able to communicate with each other.
Yeah, get that universal translator.
That's what I'm talking about. Let's talk about Chris Hemsworth, who's got a movie coming out pretty soon. So of course he is going in front of all of the nerds who are asking him questions. I think it's funny that like whenever a movie comes out, and this has been as long as there's been movies, this is the way it is. But you have to go on a press tour and you have to sit down and somebody asks you questions. And like in the age of the internet, and especially in the age of post-COVID, the character of those questions has changed. In the old times, it would be whatever local affiliate or whatever local newspaper film reviewer. So probably some white guy in a tweed jacket is asking you, about the true meaning behind Thor's butt or whatever. But now in the digital age, and with the expansion of sort of fan journalism and fan-run websites, and also just the explosion of Zoom thanks to COVID and restrictions, that tweed-jacketed, male-pattern baldness master's degree guy has turned into nerd sitting in front of a bookcase on his Zoom call, which I'm not disparaging. I am one of those nerds. I don't have a bookcase, though. And so, our stars who are starring in these nerd properties get asked about a lot of other nerd properties. And Chris Hemsworth was asked recently about his involvement in the first Star Trek film by J.J. Abrams, the 2009 Star Trek film. And he had some kind of interesting comments. He talked about how obviously it was a big deal for him. He got called in by J.J. Abrams. He knew that it was for Star Trek, but he didn't understand necessarily, what the role would be, and was kind of intimidated, but not too intimidated because he wasn't playing like actually, James Kirk or something like that. It was a different kind of role. And he said he acknowledged that was really big for him, like being in that film, being seen there, probably helped him get in with Kenneth Branagh and led to him, being able to audition and play Thor. And so he looks back on that time fondly. And at the end of the interview, he said, yeah, if J.J. Abrams called me tomorrow and said, I've got Chris Pine and I want to get you in and I want to do this Trek 4, he said he would be on board for that.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, yeah, come to think of it, like he's probably not doing much else. You know what I mean? He's probably hanging out.
Well, he just had a Netflix film, didn't he? He's in a Netflix film about hackers or something like that. So
Black Hat 2.
Yeah, it did seem like Black Hat 2, didn't it? I don't think it is connected though. No. But it's weird that, and I guess this has always existed as well, and we'll talk about that today when we talk about a movie with some big stars and some people who you'll never really seen or will never see again. The levels of stardom are always strange. You always need like a big star to sort of anchor your picture, no matter what level you're at. And Hemsworth has definitely been, the anchor for some films, but those films haven't done as well as Marvel films. And so I don't know if it's just that people want Thor and they don't want Chris Hemsworth, or if the kind of things that he has done, like Black Hat, like a Michael Mann thinking type thriller, is the kind of thing that people would pop for no matter who's in it. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that he, I like Chris Hemsworth. I think that he's
me too.
He's very talented. I think he's charming and he's good looking and he's got everything that you need. And he definitely does great in these Marvel movies. But yeah, it doesn't seem to really cross over so much as far as theater box office goes.
Right.
Streaming is another thing.
When I think of his roles, even in Kazlab, like Black Hat might be kind of for a lot of people, a deeper cut, or like something that maybe a mass audience wouldn't love or something. But then he's also tried to be in some, he's been in like the Men in Black movie, or he was in Ghostbusters.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think Men in Black did very well either. So yeah, it might.
No,
And you'd think, like, because I remember when that was coming out, it was like, oh, it's got, the two of them. And like,
right.
People were like, that's cool. But then no one, I mean, I saw it, but.
Did you?
It wasn't very good.
Was that the Stubbs era?
Yeah, I think so. So. That's why I'll take whatever.
I think that was generally thought to be a kind of a big failure. And a failure for, and in the past, a successful IP, which they kind of tanked. So
I think we talked before about how expensive or something it would be to like have him, but it actually seems doable, especially compared to we keep throwing out Tom Cruise, and I'm it's like that's never actually going to happen.
Yeah. But Tom Cruise is, speaking of jet movies, Tom Cruise's little jet movie had just passed $1 billion. It's his first movie that ever made $1 billion. So he is higher than he's ever been. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think he's like, compared to Tom Cruise, I think Chris Hemsworth is very available.
Well, we've talked about trying to get Tom Cruise into Star Trek. I think now that Tom Cruise is in the stratosphere, he is farther away than he's ever been from a Star Trek. But maybe that makes Chris Hemsworth closer than he's ever been. Who really knows? He is doing a couple films. I think maybe this last Netflix film might be another Russo brothers film as well. But he's been in a couple films that the Russo brothers have produced for Netflix. And he was in a film called Extraction, which was not a great film, but it was a totally competent sort of chasey military thriller type film.
I did not see that, but I do remember it. I think there's been a few like Russo brothers movies that have all kind of seemed like that to me, where it's like it doesn't look bad, but it also looks not like
they're all really competently done. It's just funny that like two guys who literally went from a Ray Romano movie and some episodes of an NBC TV show to producing the most successful movies of all time, and then they're like, and we want to just sort of like land at B-level streaming content, the kind of thing that like in the old days, if you were just flipping through late at night and you'd go, I'll watch this for a while. This is on TNT or something like that, but like on streaming. That's what we want to do.
Well, I mean, they've made some of the ones they did are some of my favorites, but I do kind of feel like I don't think they're there because they're like the most ambitious guys.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
They seem like they're just like, yep, this is fine.
They fight like the last nerd or tweed jacket leaves the press junket for Endgame, and they're like, oh, thank God we can stop pretending that we're like amazing filmmakers and just go back to get Ray Romano on the phone.
right, yeah. They want to just hang out with Ray, I'm sure.
Just want to do these like smaller budget movies and let the CGI guys do all the hard work.
That sounds like living the dream.
That actually doesn't sound that bad. Yeah, it does sound pretty good, actually. Man. Yeah. Go home to my wife and have dinner with my kids. So anyway, good on them, and good on Chris Hemsworth. I am looking forward to the new Thor movie, and I hope that it does well, and he continues to do well. But don't forget where you came from, and hopefully he'll get a call from J.J. Abrams soon.
Yeah, you owe him.
Yeah, they all owe us, and so it's time to pay up.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about our featured subject for this week's episode. You know, we've been talking about movies, and the birth of cinema in the 20th century heralded not only the start of a new art form, but also perhaps the greatest tool for marketing and propaganda that humanity had ever seen. And the military, one of the most liberal employers of propaganda, wasted no time getting in on the action. From the high-flying adventures of early war films like The Dawn Patrol and Hell's Angels, to the militaristic propaganda of Triumph of the Will, to Frank Capra's inspiring Why We Fight docudramas, to the various war film outings of Hollywood's real commander-in-chief, John Wayne, war in film has been depicted variously as heroic, inevitable, hell, captivating, and necessary. But by the 1980s, war was arguably less necessary than ever, emerging from the economic downturn of the 70s and triumphing over the USSR both culturally and economically. The US propaganda machine would turn to Hollywood to make the cooling Cold War look cooler than it had ever been. 1986 would see the release of Top Gun and the advent of Don Simpson, Hollywood's premier military propagandist. But in 1980, all we had was Kirk Douglas's kid, the man who created Troma, and the ultimate question: how much ass would we have kicked in World War II? That's the idea explored in the 1980 film, The Final Countdown.
On December the 6th, 1980, the nuclear-powered attack aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, with a crew of 5,000 men and a strike force of 90 aircraft, was on a routine mission in the Pacific when it encountered a storm unlike any ever recorded and disappeared.
What have you got?
2 Japanese Zeros, sir.
What?
2 trophy-class Mitsubishi A6Ms in original condition, complete with all markings. I mean, they look brand new, sir.
On December the 6th, 1980, the nuclear carrier USS Nimitz disappeared in the Pacific and reappeared December 6th, 1941, off the coast of Pearl Harbor. Kirk Douglas,
Six-wing recovery.
Martin Sheen, Catherine Ross, James Ferrantino, Ron O'Neill, and Charles Durning as Senator Chapman.
You shoot that in here, we're all going up.
The final countdown is about to begin.
Hell yeah.
And the story behind this film is crazy. It's
Really?
it all goes down.
I know nothing about the movie. Honestly, I knew vaguely, just even behind the scenes. Like, before I started watching it, I'm like, I've heard of this. I know who's in it. I know nothing about the movie. So, like, when like a portal starts opening up, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It's like Peter Douglas, or Peter Vincent Douglas, is Kirk Douglas's kid. So that's the connection there. He was a sometime actor, but what he really wanted to do was produce films. And so he came up with this idea, and this is like one of perhaps the first film that he ever did. He came up with this idea, which was like, it's 1980, right? And the U.S. is doing great abroad. They want to improve their image. Star Wars has come out, so people are looking for like, they're ready to accept like military sci-fi adventure in that way. And so he had this idea: what if we make a movie that the Navy will pay for because we're going to make them look great, and we can we use all of their equipment, we can shoot on a carrier, and all we need is like a kind of a flimsy story that's got a sci-fi bent and an interesting question, kind of a Twilight Zone type thing, and we just do all that. And that's essentially what happened. And having him in it and having his dad on board makes sense. Right now we've got a movie. We've got Kirk Douglas in a movie. What I want to know is, where did Lloyd Kaufman come from? Lloyd Kaufman is the guy who started Troma, Troma Entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking Toxic Adventure, Tromeo and Juliet, all these, schlocky sort of B films. He, of course, was a mentor to other filmmakers like James Gunn, who's gone on to make movies for Marvel and his own movies. And so, like, these two get together. The son of Spartacus and the guy behind Romeo and Juliet get together and they go, I think we can sell the U.S. military on this. And they did. They sold it. And they were able to make this film over the course of a few weeks, shot mostly in Key West, and got to use the actual aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, which had been launched a few years before in the early 70s.
Oh yeah, definitely. You could tell they were like getting the most out of using all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's obviously the film features some pretty big stars. Martin Sheen, Kirk Douglas, and Catherine Ross. Charles Durning is also in it, and then a bunch of people who are either not people that everybody would know, like James Ferrantino has a pretty big role, and he's probably best known for his work on Dynasty on TV, but otherwise, like, not a huge movie star. And then a lot of the extras were, actual servicemen, like people who were just, people that worked on the Nimitz, people in the Navy.
Oh, that's cool. Some realness there.
And it's kind of like, it was shot in 1979, came out in 1980. And for me, it is, the real problem of the movie is that they were just ahead of the curve. Like, if Tom Cruise took off in his F-14 Tomcat and a laser tunnel storm began in the sky and out of it came some Zeros, Top Gun would be huge. Every movie would be Top Gun after that, right? It wouldn't just be... it's just based on the Gulf of Sidra incident or something like that. Like, there's just some sort of military thing that nobody ever hears about. Like, if we combine, and Tom Cruise would take advantage of that later. Like, a lot of his films are he's killing aliens or something like that. But I think that this was just a little bit ahead of its time. Also, not really well budgeted. I mean, this is kind of a low budget film. It was $12 million. It was not exactly, it was distributed by United Artists, not exactly a B movie, but, more or less a B movie. I think a lot of the budget was shored up by the fact that they were able to get access to, the taxpayers paid for the movie, basically. But other than that, like, this could have been like a Top Gun for 1980, but instead it would be another few years before we got the real bear of American propaganda military films, Top Gun.
I feel like it lacks kind of with the ending, like it lacks like kind of sort of an ending to get the crowd kind of pumped up, you know what I mean? I feel like it ends a little more strange, like thinky, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the funny thing about it is that it lacks a story almost completely. Like it is almost 100% premise. And by the time almost an hour has gone by and Martin Sheen's character, this analyst Lasky, is trying to explain to the military men the opportunity that we have here, not just to win or prevent the attack on Pearl Harbor and win the war in the Pacific in World War II, but also like think about what we could do with 40 years of future knowledge. Back to the Future hadn't come out yet, and so we don't see what happens when you abuse knowledge, and Hill Valley looks like a real shithole. But at that point, Lasky isn't necessarily coded as a spook or a bad guy, but he is like kind of seduced by this idea of like, who knows what we could do? We could, improve the technology. If we ever return to 1980 or when we live our lives through to 1980, who knows where America and the world could be? And that's never real. That's put out there. That's proposed, but it's never really adjudicated till the point where the ship has to make a choice of staying or going and just decides to go back.
That's kind of what I think would have made the difference. That's why I said earlier, like, I think the Star Trek episode nailed it a little bit better because...
Oh, definitely, yeah.
They had... I guess, what was the ship? I couldn't tell by the ending. Maybe I just got confused. But in the ending of this, do they choose to go back?
Yeah, I think so. Kirk Douglas as the commander
Okay.
sort of makes the choice because the storm is they're ready to commit. You know, they've got their birds in the air and they're going to confront the Japanese Naval Air Force, and then the storm comes back, and Kirk Douglas is like, no, pull everybody in.
Okay,
you know,
okay.
we'll just go
I
home.
must have missed that line or something. That makes a little more sense, but I feel like the stakes come across more because this does start off like feeling like there is a story and a build similar to a Star Trek episode, but they're like slowly uncovering it.
Yeah.
And then I thought when they got to like the talk of should we interfere in this battle, should they talk about whether or not the politician should live.
Yeah.
I thought those are both elements in the Star Trek episode, like sort of this idea of like, should the people all go back into the fight? Should Tasha Yar go back into the fight? You know,
Right. Yeah.
and they both tie together, but they both each individually kind of have their own like dramatic weight. And for some reason in here, it just didn't really have that in the final battle. It felt like more of a, you know, knee-jerk split decision move. You know, it didn't feel like
Yeah.
you didn't have multiple characters maybe like having their own view on it. I guess you did. You mentioned,
Well,
you know,
it's funny. There's something that Star Trek does really well, and I often kind of complain about how everybody forgets that, however much you like Star Trek, you know, it is a military fiction. You know, these characters that we see they are citizens of the Federation, but they represent nominally the Federation, but they are sailors. They are soldiers
Yeah.
in Starfleet, and so we're always seeing things from the perspective of them looking at their problems through the lens of military protocol and chain of command. And yet, despite all that, and I can give Star Trek credit for this, Star Trek does a great job of showing that despite the conflict is always between what they know is right and what they are told they have to do.
Yeah.
And this, you know, the final countdown deals with that in a way, but the focus is never really strongly on that. And for a film that, again, this is, you know, still the tail end of the 70s, it is military propaganda 100%, but not in the way where it's super great that Maverick splashed those two, you know, Russian jets or Libyan jets or whatever they were. There's never a question that like what we're doing is, yeah, these guys are cocky, but they're good. And they're the American Eagles up there protecting us, and America's the best and we have to do it. This movie doesn't really even have that. Like it is, you know, the most excited anybody gets is like I said before, Lasky talking about like the potential of how they could change history. And then Kirk Douglas is like, yeah, but those aren't our rules of engagement. You know, I have to do this. This is my job. And at the end, he sees the opportunity to sort of extricate himself from the situation. And that choice is never really examined. When they get back, you know, all the admirals show up to yell at him. And he's lost an entire helicopter crew. He's lost 2 or 3 Marines shot by a Japanese. He's got a dead Japanese from 1941 on board. And we never find out like what anybody thought about his decision. He never really talks about his decision. And so like all the ramifications of it are never really explored like you would expect. It's almost like, you know, I would expect Star Trek to possibly get military details wrong because they are an allegorical, you know, moralizing, you know, sci-fi franchise. This is almost like the Army tried to make a sci-fi movie and just kind of forgot to really explore what's most interesting about sci-fi, which is alternate history, which is like, are we doing the right thing? What do we do if we meet our own grandfather? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I thought that they could have done that and it still could have been propaganda. Like, I don't think it being propaganda like prevented it from going there. I think they just did a bad job.
Yeah. I mean, the whole wrapper alone, like the fact that, you know, I was the closed time-like curve that I mentioned before. The fact that the guy that he meets at the beginning is the CAG, like he is there at the end, and Martin Sheen gets in the car and he's like, "We've got a lot to talk about." I'm like, "That's the movie. That's the Final Countdown extended universe." Like in the background, you could say that like, you know, the CAG has been like putting all that knowledge into play for 40 years. And so he could drive Martin Sheen into his like cyberpunk bunker where he's got all this technology that they've developed based on inventing the integrated circuit, in 1942. And I know they don't have the budget or maybe the imagination to show that, but it's like, that's what I want to see. Like having Kirk Douglas decide whether it would be right to refight Pearl Harbor. Yeah, okay, that's interesting for a bit, but the real sci-fi fan in me is like, no, show the other stuff.
Well, it also, like, even that ending kind of lacks something to it, because it's like, well, why did they do this whole song and dance about it,
Yeah. I don't know. Like, did he show up then to make sure that Martin Sheen like got on the boat? Because he knew what was going to happen. Was he just there to observe it?
Martin Sheen being there was important.
Yeah, because Martin Sheen, all he does is save the dog. Like, he's just trying to get his wife's dog back, I guess. That's the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
39 years later, it's like, oh, thank you, got my dog back. Thanks.
That's funny. I like that.
It's like the longest, it's like temporal pet lodging. Yeah. You just send my dog through a time portal. I guess
that works. Yeah. I just feel like they could have done something more with it. Even in like, I think at like Time Zero or whatever, there's this element of like Guinan and Picard. It happens like Doctor Who too, where you like know things about a person's life before they experience it. Even that feels like, I don't know, interesting. Even if it's like the end of the episode and you find that out, it's like tells you something about their relationship.
And having that relationship is important too. Like I guess I kind of like that the film isn't overly moralizing in any way. Like it doesn't, Charles Durning plays the kind of hawkish senator who, and knowing what we know now about what FDR may or may not have known about Pearl Harbor, I'm not sure. This movie is fiction, but apparently FDR doesn't want to pursue a Pacific campaign. But Charles Durning is saying, no. I mean, they're definitely going to attack, and we need to be ready. And so he's this voice of like, we should get involved in his own time, but he's never really let in on what's going on. And so as he is arguing for war, he's not like on the bridge influencing Kirk Douglas. He's not saying, to Kirk Douglas, you're a military man and you might be from the future, but how many people died and you've seen the Arizona Monument and you have a duty to your country no matter what century you're in. Like none of that really happens. Like he's just kept waiting in the wings until he's so frustrated that he ends up blowing himself up and four Marine aviators with him because nobody will tell him what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I expected them too to like do something with the idea of like, well, you could attack, maybe like surprise them and attack before they kill anyone or something, prevent the attack. But then like World War II might not happen. Or like we might not enter World War II, and I thought that would be a moral question.
Or think of the Japanese lives saved on the mainland. If we can crush the Pacific Fleet here and stop the Pearl Harbor attack, then we don't have to drop nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like that sort of thing. And I was, it won't surprise you, or maybe it will, to know that old military guys like this movie. In some cases, they like it more than Top Gun. And I was watching a couple of YouTube videos of people sort of breaking down the tale of the tape. And if you are talking about just, say, the Nimitz or the Enterprise, a carrier from this era, with or without any other like cohort ships, it could probably take on most of the Japanese Navy at the time, like on its own. Mm-hmm. Not only does it have many fighter jets, anti-submarine planes, bombers, just hundreds of planes. It's also got cruise missiles, like hundreds of cruise missiles, which themselves could probably just sink a World War II battleship like on their own. So if they decided to really open it up, like they would definitely have turned the tide of the entire battle, not just Pearl Harbor.
Right. So I thought, I don't know. I thought there could have been something with that. That is cool. I like the military nerds like this.
I don't want to see more of this, Captain Marvel, Top Gun Maverick bullshit propaganda films. But if somebody wanted to make like a remake of this, the finalist countdown, where we actually did try to do a little alternate history and use the whole CGI to the best effect and show some fights, dog fights, and military stuff, it could be interesting.
You know what they'll do though, and because I was thinking, and I don't know what the other thing could have been, but it's like you've got that guy who could be vice president, and right. I know it's sort of like they sort of just get on the idea of is it okay to change history or whatever, but they should have given it some stakes and been like, okay, what would be, what would be so different if he became vice president? That's what I thought they would do. And I think what they would do now is they would say that he wouldn't drop the nuclear bombs, and they'd say that'd be a bad thing. And they would make...
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway...
Right. Yeah, at the time, definitely. Now I would argue it'd be a great thing if we didn't do that.
Yeah.
Or blew up and burned down all the things that we did on our way to doing that in Japan.
That's just what I think would happen in the, the propaganda. Well, I guess that's what I thought they were going to do. But then, I don't know if this is this is probably better, but worse is that, like, it ended up really not really mattering because that guy just kind of, I don't know how you feel about it, but he just kind of, like, accidentally killed himself,
Yeah, right. Maybe him being too gung-ho was, like, his undoing, but he just didn't have any influence on anything, and I thought that was kind of a shame. I like the idea of sacrifice, and there should be a choice in a narrative like this, because we know that, well, we can be fairly certain, I guess, unless they're going to do a whole trilogy, that we're not going to change the past. And skipping forward a little bit to our TV episode, we also know that the world will return to the way that it's supposed to be. But in neither The Final Countdown nor Yesterday's Enterprise is anything really set up as much of a sacrifice. If, for instance, the choice did come down to the CAG's like choice. Like, let's say Kirk Douglas is down, and so Commander Owens is in charge, and he's the one who has to make the choice of whether they commit or not. And it comes down to Catherine Ross's character is, her life will be forfeit because, I don't know, she's somewhere, the Japanese guy has her or something, and he has to choose between keeping history the way it is or saving her, and he has to, like, sacrifice her. That would be a powerful choice. And in the Star Trek episode, we kind of get the same thing where we got Tasha Yar back. And that's a fun thing, but she's been gone for like a year and a half now in the show.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see her, but we don't care about her as much as anybody else. And in order to return to the nice, well-lit Enterprise D that we know, chuck her off with Shooter McGavin. Forget it. Like, it just makes sense that she leaves. And so both of those situations don't really cause like the tension of like, no, we have to pick between the lesser of two evils.
I don't know. I really felt her choice because, I mean, it made sense. It was like, this is where they're going, but I think it really worked, and it both made sense and like worked to have Guinan there to kind of like, because she experiences a different type of reaction, but that's sort of like, wait a minute, she's not here. And I think that idea of like, I guess it's the obvious choice, but the idea that Tasha gets to like take another crack at living and maybe dying, but not in such a senseless way, like that makes it, I don't know, feel good, even if maybe it's not a sacrifice. It's for sure a sacrifice compared to like, well, if you could stay here and like, we don't know what happens, if they change time, you might still be alive. But if you go back, you're for sure going to die.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It worked pretty well to me.
And of course she doesn't, if we're going to talk beyond Yesterday's Enterprise, but we can maybe get to that later.
Yeah.
The big difference between this, and this is the movie magic, right? This is why somebody like Don Simpson is Don Simpson, is that Don Simpson made this sexy. It's one thing to have a bunch of guys in like 70s, but apparently in the military in the 70s, you could have a fairly close cropped beard and still be a midshipman on a Navy ship. I don't think you can do that now, but it's all well and good to have a bored looking Kirk Douglas walking around a bridge. But
Right.
Don Simpson comes in with Jerry Bruckheimer, and they put the neon lights on, and they make everybody sweaty, and you got Tom Cruise making eyes at people, and then you get the Kenny Loggins in there, and then suddenly this is like, oh, I want more of this.
Yeah. The actual movie we watched, Final Countdown, felt a little bit more like, I don't know. It did feel realistic, I guess, because they were like mostly were on the ships and stuff. But yeah, it didn't have that like, other than when they go into the portal, that was pretty wild. Otherwise, it's like pretty subdued.
Yeah, that was good. I like it. Apparently, there's a very loud sound when it happens, and so everybody's holding their ears. But then, like, on their way back, Martin Sheen's got the dog, and he's holding the dog's ears. So you see for a few seconds, like, this dog is wrestling around. He's trying to hold the dog's ears. So anyway, he's an animal guy. It's okay.
I loved those scenes, though. I thought they looked really cool.
Yeah, and it's never.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't need an explanation, but it's never explained. Nothing's ever really laid out for you. I've heard that it's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with the film The Philadelphia Experiment.
Maybe. It's not...
Again, this is what films were before Top Gun made and Tom Cruise made military films, cool and sci-fi. But The Philadelphia Experiment is, I think, a 1984 film based on the the rumored real life Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia Experiment was an alleged project in World War II, an attempt by the U.S. Navy to make a ship invisible. And as dumb as that sounds, it's a real Fox Mulder kind of thing. And so there have been a lot, it's all classified, and there's been a lot of like theories about it over the years. But like one of the theories is that they warped space in such a way that that caused the ship in question to travel through time. And so the film takes that and runs with it. And it's kind of a reverse Final Countdown where a 1940s ship is transported to the 1980s.
Warp ships. I love it.
Yeah. Warp ships. Right. So, I mean, there's a little more to hang your hat on there. But to me, this did remind me of that pre-Simpson era film, something like The Enemy Below, or something like that, where it's just a bunch of people and they just want to do their jobs. And sometimes they talk about how their jobs are tough, but the other guy's got a job to do too. Only not, no Robert Mitchum and no cracking 60s movie dialogue. Just people like Captain on the bridge, Captain leaving the bridge, Captain on the bridge, Captain leaving the bridge.
I mean, some of the guys get a little heated, but overall, I mean, I liked kind of the, like, watching it all the procedures go down and stuff. Like, it did. I kind of clicked with it for a while because I was like, this is like exactly like 80% of Star Trek episodes,
Yeah.
Missing that extra little bit, especially like you were saying, the characterization and stuff could be better. But otherwise, I was like, it just feels like watching Star Trek, but like an actual Navy,
Yeah, if they'd had some actors, maybe they could have dug more down into what the crew was thinking. Because there are some scenes where, they turn the radio on and it's a Joe Louis fight or something like that, and some of the seamen are like, "What's going on? Why are they playing this? Like, I don't understand what's happening here." Mm-hmm. And the crew is getting a little restless, and Kirk Douglas has to come out and be like, "All right, everybody, calm down."
They really nailed too. This reminded me a lot of Star Trek, where like they're slowly kind of revealing what's going on, and that's like a good chunk of the movie. Even it's just like figuring out what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And so I like that. I like that sort of like Star Trek, like kind of uncovering the mystery, and then the follow through would have been like, then once you figure it out, you got to decide, okay, how do we react to this? I think they could have done that part better.
Yeah. Yeah, it all felt like a lot of sizzle, not much steak.
Yeah. I enjoyed watching it too, though. I'd never seen it, and it looked cool, and especially the portal scenes were awesome.
So, like, let's see, UA was bought by Sony, right? Sony's still around. So come on, Sony, do it. Remake The Final Countdown. And what the hell? Take the U.S. government money. Go for it. Take the Top Gun route. Don't let Top Gun Maverick. They just made $1 billion.
Well,
it's time to greenlight all the military pictures. Let's do The Final Countdown remake.
There's a similar thing, too, to Top Gun here, where it's sort of like, no one... If you did remake it, it could be similar to Last Top Gun, where it's like, no one really believes in the military or the United States anymore. So we have to make this movie to pump people up, but it kind of doesn't make sense because of that. Like, and we're like, the conflict is like drone pilots versus fighter pilots, but no one cares either way in real life, I guess. It's just like,
yeah, I don't think so.
So anyway,
yeah.
Part of that movie is like, we've got the old ships, like to remind us of those times when we did believe in that. And that could happen in this. It's like, what if a current naval battleship was transported back to like World War II? Like, it could be the last, war that people feel like we did anything good in, you know what I mean? Like, it could have that sort of thematic thing, and it could fire people up. You know what I mean? Like, hey, remember this? Yeah, well, we remember that, and we're proud of it.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe it's not. I mean, World War II is always going to be a popular destination, I suppose, for fiction. But
unless they want to do like, what if we won Vietnam or something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it has to be a naval exchange, though, or maybe not, or maybe we could be, we're going to drop this Delta Force, a team of badasses, right into Da Nang or something like that, and just like re-win. Well, I guess we already did that. It's called Rambo.
I've got the scene. It's just like some guys, and they're like military guys, but they're just running parachuting drills in the modern day over, like, I don't know, somewhere in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam or one of the places we were blowing up. They're skydiving. In the air, there's a portal. They go through the portal.
Dive through a portal.
All of a sudden, blam, boom, bow, they're in a war zone.
Oh my God. It's the Tet Offensive. Yeah.
That'd be a cool scene.
So it's like Apocalypse Now. No, it's like Full Metal Jacket meets Time Rider.
Time Rider, yeah, sure.
Time Rider, Fred Ward is a dirt biker who ends up in the Old West.
Whoa, that's great. That's awesome.
Actually, if you haven't seen Time Rider, you should watch Time Rider. Yeah, it's a pretty good bad movie. All right, I think that I can't believe we've got to talk about Yesterday's Enterprise. We spent all this time on this movie. But yeah, I think that we have covered this part of our subject for this week. Let's take a break for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more Backtrekking.
Okay, Caliban, are you prepared to take your Sailor Noob graduation quiz?
Hana, I'm so prepared for this. I learned fluent Japanese.
Impressive.
Arigato gozaimasu.
First question. The hero of Sailor Moon is Usagi Tsukino. What does Usagi mean in Japanese?
Rabbit.
Correct.
Yes.
Next question. As Sailor Moon, Usagi and the Sailor Scouts live and go to school in what Tokyo neighborhood?
Easy. Azubu Juban.
That's right. One more correct answer and you'll no longer be a Sailor Noob. The human form of the Cardian Leshy is tasked by Aelin Ann to gather life energy. What Japanese historical period are Leshy's human forms closed from?
What?
I'm sorry, the answer was the Heian period.
Bacana!
Better luck next time. But for all the answers, listen to Sailor Noob, where we discuss the food, fashion, and culture of Sailor Moon. Wherever you get your podcasts.
Watashi wa hazukashi. Okay, we're back. It's time to talk about the Trek side of this equation. With the return of Star Trek on streaming television, a familiar debate has returned as well. What makes a good episode of Star Trek? Many would argue that Star Trek is, at its core, about examining moral dilemmas in a sci-fi setting, and even more may argue whether or not that's best served by serial or more long-form storytelling, or by a more or less heavy use of allegory. Though fans often argue about the execution of Star Trek episodes, few fans disagree that one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek is a very unconventional hour with a unique origin story. It's a tale set almost exclusively outside the world of Star Trek that we know, and yet one that underlines and reaffirms the values of the franchise, the values of duty, circumspection, and self-sacrifice, values that helped to ensure that history would never forget the name Yesterday's Enterprise.
Next time on Star Trek: The Next Generation, an Enterprise from the past rips through time and alters the future.
I'm supposed to be dead.
Now Lieutenant Yar lives again to help the crew fight a devastating battle.
This war's not supposed to be happening. You've got to send those people back to correct this.
And one courageous team must die to save the Federation from destruction on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
So the first story is like a closed time-like curve, right? You have a time that we understand and accept, which is that Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941 and December 7th, and we would then go into the war and yada, 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 lead to the Nimitz in 1980. The Nimitz goes back in time and does affect things, but doesn't stick around long enough or do anything important enough to change what happens. And in fact, possibly ensures what happens by, I don't know, making the Japanese commit to their attack, or maybe, Tideman affects how history plays out after World War II by being there. This is kind of like a reversed closed time-like curve in that somebody that we weren't even paying, we were just minding our own business, and a ship from the past came to where we were, and it was important in the past, and so therefore now it has come to a different future, but then once we send it back and zip everything up, it will return the timeline to the way that it's supposed to be. And so it's sort of like the flip side of the same kind of story structure. And arguably,
right, yeah.
Obviously we're following our characters, but the only characters who are unchanged in this are the characters on the Enterprise C. I could see a form of this episode where we just pick up with the Enterprise C and they are set upon by Romulans at Narenda 3 and are thrown through a time portal and end up in the familiar universe of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and meeting all these characters that they don't know and understand, and then Shooter McGavin has to take the ship back to the past to do what's right. But of course, they're not the stars of the show.
Oh, I see. Like there almost could have been an episode where this happens to Picard or whatever.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I'm sure there are. I'm trying to think now because, well, you brought up Time Zero before. That's another good example where were there really like snake aliens in San Francisco killing people and blaming it on cholera?
So, yeah.
I don't know. I guess so. Yeah. And Data's head is now 700 years old. It's stuck on his body or whatever.
It's been there the whole time.
That's my favorite kind of time travel story. A lot of people like time travel stories because you can do whatever you want and you can change things and you come back to a world that's, the sound of thunder is completely different than what you would expect. But I like when time travel lets you go to fun places that you couldn't normally go, but you have to, anything that you do is kind of going to bring about what already happened. And so therefore you are forced to rationalize and sort of contextualize the choices that you make. Not that I'm not a free will person, I am, but I like when, whatever you do to try to avoid a fate is just going to bring you closer to that fate because, your fate is your fate.
Oh, like predestined almost.
Yeah, I guess I said I wasn't a fate guy, but
yeah.
but I like stories like that. I wish you'd seen Time Rider because there's a great one in there that we can talk about. But a lot of time travel stories do operate like that. And then you've got the other side, which is Marty McFly, plays Chuck Berry at a school dance, and he comes back and he's got a super cool truck.
Yeah, I guess things do all just come back to work perfectly in this episode, or fit together, nothing slightly unchanged, I guess.
Yeah, although there is the one little hanging Chad of sending Tasha Yar, who should not exist at all, back to the past
I guess that.
of the Prime timeline. And then she does not die at Narenda 3, and then later, under horrible circumstances, gives birth to Sayla, who would become an antagonist and a leader of the Tal Shiar in the regular timeline.
So really, they made the wrong choice.
Well, they made maybe the best choice that they could under the circumstances.
No, it works out. And it works both as you don't really end this episode going like, I wonder what happened to her, you know?
No, you don't. And it's a perfect ending to the episode because you just end it and you don't know if anybody ever knows what happened. You know that Guinan knows what happened, but she just sits down with Geordi and she's like, tell me about Tasha Yar.
Yeah.
And that's just, man, we don't get endings like that in Star Trek anymore. It's just a perfect ending.
The whole episode is constructed so well. I love how it starts and ends with Guinan talking to Worf and then Geordi, and it's like, with Worf, it's like a little comedic character moment, but like it feels so natural.
It does. It's so good, and it's so necessary because, of course, he will not be in the entire episode.
I know
that's impossible. But yeah, just give Michael Dorn a little bit, and it's one of his most famous and well-loved bits.
Yeah. So I just feel like I had that same feeling I was describing and watching Final Countdown, but it was even better here, where like the way the story just flows and progresses, it's all so satisfying. I don't know. It's that same thing of, I was saying it back with Elementary, My Dear Data, where it feels a little bit like a warm blanket, because it's like, oh, they're in the groove on this one. They're doing their thing. Like tensions are raising perfectly.
Yeah. It's amazing that this worked out the way that it did and as well as it did, because it had a really bumpy or at least convoluted path to the screen. The episode is based on two separate episode ideas that were pitched to the production. And I'll do the short version. I've got the long version available on my show Enterprising Individuals, where I interviewed Eric Stillwell, one of the writers of the episode, and he talked about the origin of this episode. But there was two pitches, one by a writer named Trent Christopher Ganino, and that involved, I'm not sure if it was more than sort of a treatment or an idea, but that did involve a Enterprise from the past, a previous Enterprise showing up, and then Picard needing to decide whether or not they would send it back, and sort of arguing over the ship's fate. And then the Tasha Yar idea came from Eric Stillwell's idea, who was he was a production assistant on the show and had met and talked with Tasha Yar, and thought like, oh, I should come up with this idea where we could like bring Denise Crosby back to the show. And so one of the ideas that he came up with was that there would be a incident with the Guardian of Forever where a Vulcan research team would accidentally end up killing Surak in the past. So a Vulcan research team, presumably, and this actually like itself is sort of based, I think, on Yesteryear from the animated series. But a Vulcan research team would somehow screw up and kill Surak, and that would lead to like a war with the Romulans, or actually I think with the Vulcans, who had become more Romulan-like without Surak to lead them. And by the end of the episode, Sarek, Spock's father, would return and would end up going back in time and taking the place and assuming the role of Surak in the past, kind of healing that timeline. And then that would return everybody to normal. And so they took these two ideas and like stuck them together and kept the idea of the Enterprise C, the old Enterprise, and then instead had Tasha Yar sort of fill the role of going back and being somebody who was present at something that she presumably wasn't present at before. And all that was well and good. They were off and running. And remember, at this point, this is the middle of season 3 of TNG, so we're clicking on all cylinders as far as the writing goes and all the writers that they've got. And they thought that they had until the new year, until after Christmas break, to get the teleplay done. But then they realized that this is a time travel episode. Let's have Whoopi Goldberg as Guinan be there and introduce this element of her character, the idea that there is something about her or something about El-Orians that they understand, different timelines, and she can see through this thing, and she's available. And if we can get Whoopi, we need to get Whoopi. So it went from having until after Christmas to finish the script to Thanksgiving is this weekend. Can you get it done in 3 days?
Wow.
And so Ira Stephen Bear, Richard Manning, Heinz Beimler, and Ronald D. Moore, the four like main writer guys of that time, all took a part of the script and just gangbanged the thing out. Basically, they all just split it up into 4 sections, and each wrote a section and then brought it back together and stuck it together.
Wow.
And for being a complete Frankenstein of a script, it like really works pretty well. Like you can track just about everything. You even got a little
it's so good
side story, with Shooter McGavin and Tasha Yar, and so everything works really great.
This is like the mark of one of the best types of Star Trek episodes, where like when you got done watching it, you feel like dang, I just watched like a movie in 45 minutes,
Oh yeah.
Like a movie quality like story. I you know what I mean? Like it feels like you've been thrilled as if you've gone to the movie theaters, I guess.
Yeah.
Like how do they pull that off,
I don't know. And speaking of like movies, they did, I think, look at this as something a little different, a little more cinematic. Obviously we're very used, never in any other episode is it more clear how brightly lit the Enterprise bridge is from all sides when they switch to the other timeline, and then suddenly everything is sort of like dark and atmospheric.
It was
and
cool.
I'm not saying it's cool. I'm not saying I want it to be that way all the time, and obviously it's a visual sort of metaphor that works really well. But it's super bright, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, they can light it like a movie if they want. Like they can make it sort of give it tonality, but that's not what we want. We want our characters to be in the light of the light of justice and having fun. So, speaking of having fun, I did like the fact that even though it is this like horrible, war universe, it's a dystopia, and like Commander Riker doesn't get along quite as well with Captain Picard. I do like the fact that it's still the Enterprise crew, and that maybe doesn't make any sense based on how the events would unfold of the next 20 years in their universe. But when Picard presents to them, so the bartender says that we need to blow up this ship, like his whole it's the typical Ready Room scene, and his crew is like, all right, hold on, and they're giving him all the things like they would in the regular universe. They're like, are you sure we can trust her? Would this work? Like, what about this? They're still doing what they do. Like, they're still the best in Starfleet. They're still mostly the characters that we recognize. But, just in this different circumstances, this universe of war and darkness.
Yeah, it's a little...
It's not like...
strange.
It's not like, speaking of strange, a Strange New Worlds episode where everybody becomes a weird fairy tale character and they all just act like assholes for an hour.
Wow.
Those of us who are up to date on Strange New Worlds will know what I'm talking about.
It is a little odd, like that, like all of history could change like that and they're all still, together, I guess.
Well, yeah. Contracts, TV contracts.
It works. Yeah, it works.
But it isn't like Geordi has like a horrible scar and they're all carrying knives around. I like the fact that they didn't try to replicate like the mirror universe. Yeah.
And it fits. And they're smart enough to be like, well, Worf's not here, I guess,
Yeah.
It's like
it
just
gives you
believable
depth
enough.
Yeah, it gives you depth on some of the character elements and choices too. I like, Picard is a little different. And he's still Picard. So it's not like he is totally freaking out or something like that. But I do like when he finally, takes Garrett aside and he's like, "Look, this isn't going well. Like we're losing. We are going to lose this. So it's great that you're here, but really the best thing that you could do is go back and do this crazy plan, because if you had any effect at all, it was in the past, like not now." And I don't know how to tell you that. And then later when like Tasha Yar is kind of thinking about her stuff and she comes to visit him, is he like updating his like will and testament or something?
Is that
he's
what
on
it
his
was?
I couldn't tell, and I wasn't watching it in HD, but he's on his computer and it says like JL Picard. And when she comes in, he quick like turns his screen off. And so obviously it was something that he didn't want her to see him doing. But there are these little notes of desperation. Wow. In the facade, of his Picardiness throughout the episode that I thought was very intriguing.
Yeah, he's great, and it is cool because it still feels like such an insight to his character. You said they're the same guy, but like it is like, yeah, this is like a different universe, but it's still like you still feel like you're learning something about Picard, I guess. And I liked one thing I wanted to add in was I sort of liked, we talked about Whoopi Goldberg and how they're like, oh well, let's have her here, you know. We talked about how that was like a really good idea, but it also was like a thing that I've mentioned before that I think is cool, of like adding more to the lore of like the race of aliens or whatever, but like, you know, not like doing it for a reason, to like have it serve like this really good function in the story and it's still like really believable. You know, it's better than like, here's all my, you know, Romulan lore or whatever. This is like
yeah,
this felt like a good example of that, so I wanted to like kind of point that out.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter like why it's the Romulans or the Klingons or whatever. Like it's just, we just need an adversary. We need somebody to show up with a bunch of ships at the end. There has to be a threat. And the episode does a great job of building the tension to the point where, and if you look at, you know, like modern sci-fi or Star Trek shows, you know, obviously the effects are a lot different, but it's just like the Enterprise like slowly turning, and then an older Enterprise slowly heading towards a wormhole, and yet you're like, get there, come on, get through the thing, and there, you know, Riker gets blown up and Picard jumps over the thing and he's hitting the buttons and the fire is coming up in the foreground,
so
and you're like, come on, do it. Yeah.
They get it. They get really action and suspense really good, and they can do it without having the ships like zip around like crazy. That's something.
Yeah.
It's a little off topic, but they've had a few good, I think, ship moments in this latest season of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
And the thing I get that I like about it is it's a little sped up, but I'm like, they get that it should be slow, that the ship shouldn't be like blasting through space, that it's like delicately, you know, swimming through the stars, you know, it's very elegant but slow, you know, when it's doing these things. I love it. So, but that's kind of what the TNG really nailed. Deep Space Nine too, a lot of great, you know, naval type battles in those. Yeah. It's
there's the dogfighty aspect of space battles, and there's the slow, you know, capital ship side. And Star Trek lacks the former because we don't really see fighters or anything like that usually in Star Trek, but it's trying to sort of put that in now. But yeah, I do like that idea. Let's talk about elegant and slow. Let's talk about the Enterprise C, the Ambassador class, my favorite version of the Enterprise. Dem nacelles.
Really? That's your favorite?
Yeah, it is. I like the fact that I like the old radar dish Constellation class, and I like the curvy, you know, organic swoop of the D. But I love the sort of polygonal, clean shape of the transitional form of the Ambassador class.
Yeah, it does look pretty cool. It looks pretty similar to the D in some ways.
Yeah,
it's sort of like now.
If you found like a hybrid between the D and the movie Constellation class.
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah,
they nailed it if that's what they're going for, or like that's the exact right thing they did. Like it did have like, I liked having all the guys with the movie style uniforms and stuff. Like, yeah, it all felt very good. Very natural.
I've said Constellation class 100 times, and I don't want letters. It's the Constitution class, of course. The Enterprise is the Constitution class. They're very similar words, sue me. Yeah, those
right.
Uniforms are funny. I'm sure they all came out of the costume department. You'll notice they're not wearing the ruffled shirts, and that's because the ruffled shirts from the Monster Maroon uniforms from the movies were like custom made, and they were expensive to make. You know how they've got the sort of like ribbed collars and stuff like that, and they're like, look, we're already like blowing up the bridge, and we're changing the lighting and stuff like that, so we can't afford to make these shirts. So apparently in the mid 23rd century, they just didn't wear shirts under their jackets.
Well, that explains the change. Like, it feels like it's not the exact time, you know?
Yeah, it don't have to be exactly the same.
All these things are making me realize why it felt like a movie. It's because they had the movie outfits, the lighting, and then, like, the story and everything. if anything, yeah, it benefited from like taking the things from those movies for one episode, because it made it feel, that always like adds a little bit to it, you know.
Definitely. We meet the captain of the Enterprise C, Captain Rachel Garrett, who is definitely one of the first female captains that we see in Star Trek, period.
Yeah.
I think there's the lady captain that Picard meets when he's being told about the conspiracy.
Yeah.
In I can't remember which episode, but otherwise,
Conspiracy,
yeah, the first
right?
like, is it conspiracy? I thought that it was an episode before that where they're like, "Watch out, Captain Picard." But yeah, you might be right.
Yeah.
With Berryman too.
Yes,
as
right.
the bullying guy.
She doesn't really do anything in that episode, though. She's
No,
just
she
like
didn't really
part
do
of a
anything.
group that's like to tell them, yeah.
Yeah. I really like Rachel Garrett a lot, and she, of course, does appear in a novel or two. But otherwise, we don't really see anything. If you want to find another show to do, Paramount, do a Lost Era show featuring the Enterprise C. That's what I say.
They get
the
started
nacelles
off
going, and
beginning of the
yeah.
episode. She goes to the Klingon time monastery and touches the crystal and sees,
what?
oh no.
Yeah. Oh no, I got a paperweight in my forehead. Yeah. Interesting, completely random fact, which totally justifies our use of these two pieces of art together. But the piece of shrapnel appliance that is used, in her demise in the show is the wing from a model kit, a VF-1 Valkyrie model kit from Super Dimension Fortress Macross, the anime show, also known as Robotech here on our shores. Those jets in that show were based around the VF-84 Jolly Roger Squadron of Tomcats. So, again,
wow.
I don't know if it's all just the nerds all growing up on the same stuff and then they go off and make different things that are connected because you can't help it because you're all coming from the same place. Like everybody watching Dark Star and then going off and making things that look like Dark Star.
True, yeah. No,
but I love
for sure.
I love Rachel Garrett, and I love the fact that, in 10 years, from 1980 to 1990, when this episode came out, there is like a complete reversal of sexual politics. You've got Catherine Ross, a lady who is an assistant to a senator that everybody thinks that she's fucking. And she's like, yeah, but I use my beauty to get in the door. And it's like, okay. And then we need the CAG to tell us, like, you're a remarkable woman. And later on, Rachel Garrett's like, what the fuck's going on? Where's my ship? Everybody, listen, I'm the captain. We're all going to go back and die because that's what the universe needs. And she's just going to lead them back.
She has like your more kind of typical captain role of like, caring about your crew and the sacrifice.
Nobody's got to talk about how handsome she is as a woman and nothing like that,
Well,
she doesn't have a dog.
That does remind me of, or I was going to say about the film we talked about, The Final Countdown. I don't know why I keep saying it. Like, I can't say its name, but I did like the introduction of her character. I was like, oh, it's a little weird, but I overall liked her character a lot. But then I guess like everyone else, like, I feel like they just don't really get to like make an important decision in the end. And then it's just revealed like, oh, she is alive in this time, like I was kind of let down by that a little bit too. I was kind of bummed out.
Yeah, I just want the Final Countdown extended universe.
And the Enterprise C extended universe.
Yeah, definitely. Or the historical adventures of the Enterprise C. You have to wonder what happened between Picard and Guinan in this universe that he trusts her so much. Like, his life must be very different. And unfortunately, we know in our universe, in the Prime timeline, what happens between Picard and Guinan to form that bond of trust. He goes to her bar in 2024 and she drinks a potion and summons Q or something.
Well, that's the same alternate timeline universe?
No, I mean that's our timeline, right? Like we never find out in the pages of TNG.
I see. Yeah.
What their connection is, but they do meet each other across time, thanks to the Nexus, thanks to the times arrow and all that sort of thing. And so you figure maybe that's just it. But then we learn, thanks to Picard season 2, that old Picard meets young Guinan while she's running a bar, and she's just kind of there. And why did you guys bother to do this? Why just not? It's depressing.
Is that because wouldn't Time Zero just be the moment?
Oh man, Gooey, are you on the internet at all? I'm just curious. I feel like I've gone through 10 weeks of intensive boot camp training about trying to explain to people the difference between the events of Time Zero and then why she doesn't remember him here and there. And I think the showrunners of Picard need to go through that training as well, because at first everybody said, look, Mark Twain was before 2024, so why doesn't she remember him? And the showrunners tried to say, oh, it's because the timeline has changed, so that Picard would have never gone back. That makes sense, I guess, in a Yesterday's Enterprise kind of way. But then other things happen that would also change, like when they would have met later in the season. And so I think it becomes clear that they didn't think about that. Also, I think it's clear that in the writing of season 2 of Picard, a lot of things were changed and a lot of things were probably dropped. Mm-hmm. The fact that it is set primarily in the time of past tense, and the early trailers, featured the I can't remember what it's called, but the
Sanctuary
Bajoran
cities.
Yeah, but also the Bajoran like prophecy stone or whatever it was. And so there are a lot of theories in fandom that like they wanted Avery Brooks to show up, and be part of a time traveling wormhole alien, and then he didn't want to do that, so they had to rewrite a lot of stuff, and so the entire thing is a mess. And
okay.
I think it's canon and it's fine, and that's what happens in his life, but we're not going to press the details too much in terms of time travel.
But so everything is all set back to normal now, though, right? At the end of Picard, right?
Is it? Because a Borgified Jurati now then lives 400 years of history. She is the Tideman. She is the person who stays behind and then shows up 400 years later and is like, what's up? So does she have 400 extra years of technology and development? Like what is any of that? And are we ever going to go back to any of that? And maybe we just shouldn't?
Probably not. But how about this? In terms of Picard and Guinan's relationship, okay. They set the timeline to this new... They hit reset or whatever, and they put things together as good as they could. And Picard he's still met Guinan in our current time, basically.
Sure.
But now in the lore, did they wipe out him meeting her in Time Zero, or does that all get put back into the memory?
I assume that works still. I still don't understand, because it seemed to me, so we're talking about closed time-like curves, and it seemed to me that we were setting up that, yes, Picard and crew were going back to what is essentially our present, but is 2 years later, which they didn't have to do, but they did to name check, past tense. And that looks like our future, but it is a future that has been subtly altered, because it means that in the future of our present, Picard would not be a nice tea-drinking, book-reading explorer. He would be a horrible despoiler and conqueror, which means he would never have been in a position to go back in time to our 1906 or whatever and hang out in Chicago or San Francisco with Guinan. Uh-huh. And so that technically should not have happened. So therefore Guinan of our present 2024 would not know who he is. But that none of that matters, because in that present, Picard defeats the Borg Queen and Jurati merges with her, and nobody mentions that the timeline is repaired or anything. Picard does get transported by Q back to his present, but Jurati just lives her life. And so she has just been hiding in the Delta Quadrant for 400 years in the regular... It seems clear that it is the regular timeline. It was never an alternate timeline. So Guinan should have met Picard and know who he is when he walks into her bar. And my whole thing is, I don't... People are like, they don't know Star Trek. It's tough to write this stuff. And I do think that they had to make changes as they went. But it is a mess, and if you're not sure you can pull it off, maybe just tell a more straightforward story is kind of like my argument.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to tell, in the grand tradition of Star Trek storytelling, you wanted to tell like this kind of twisty time story. Then you've also got, time traveling Gary Seven Romulan lady who I never questioned that Gary Seven could travel through time, but we never see him travel through time. Like he's just in the 60s in the original TOS episode. But why not? Make him a Doctor Who. Just go ahead and do what he basically is anyway. And so yeah, I mean, it's just, it's kind of a mess, man. It isn't, I love talking about sci-fi. I love talking about Star Trek, but I just get depressed when I talk about new Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk about it. So that's not a good thing.
Yeah. That's why I had to ask you about that stuff. Cause and this is almost by choice, but after I was done watching that season, I mostly forgot it. So the details I already couldn't remember, but
because they are transported to an alternate present, right, of Nazi Starfleet, and then they go back in time around the sun, and there's no mention of them going, jumping universes or anything like that.
So it's
they go
alternate universe, then time
the past
travel.
of an alternate universe, right? But nobody mentions that. How did they get there in the first place, and how did they get back? And you could argue that once they make or prevent the change, then everything will play out the way it's supposed to. Only now with Jurati being out there, or was she always out there? Because how does she show up in the Prime universe with the space butthole in the future to say, hey, we need help with this space butthole? The thing is that they're not, look, none of this makes sense anyway, and it all just based on the rules of fiction, but there are kind of generally established rules of fiction in sci-fi, and certainly in Star Trek storytelling, that they are just kind of ignoring. But again,
yeah, whatever,
man. It's cute. It doesn't really matter.
If you leave it to one thing, it's believable. But I think their issue is, okay, what are 10 types of Star Trek stories we want to tell? Okay, wormhole, alternate universe, alternate timeline, this and this and this. Okay, well, that's what's going to be in our season. But it's all got to be part of the same story,
If you want to do just 10 chapters, if you want to do it completely serialized and not standalone.
Well, I don't know. That's why, think about the past, 8 episodes of Strange New Worlds. That's all been interesting enough. What if they're well, this all has to be in one continuous story, So now we're in the kid's storybook, but the storybook is in an alternate timeline where they're putting the premise in a different premise and a different premise, and it's slow down.
It's a hat store. Yeah. The one good thing that I think came out of that kind of storytelling in Picard season 2, and I don't know, here we are talking about Picard season 2, but it's a guy in an episode about time travel. What do you expect is going to happen? And of course they had to break continuity to do it, because they had to kill Picard's mother as as a middle-aged woman, and not as the old lady that we know that he sees her as in Where No Man Has Gone Before. But is the fact that him being able to go back in time and experience these events means that he understands better something that he couldn't change, which is him taking the key from where it's hidden. I guess spoilers for all of Picard season 2, but taking the key from its hiding place and unlocking the door, and then his mother, using that opportunity to escape and to do harm to herself. That's something that happened to him a long time ago, and he repressed and tried not to think about. And it's not like they changed it. It's not like they saved her and she went on to, live a long, healthy life. It still happens, but he understands more what she was going through. And it resolves something for him emotionally. That's a good way to use that. And also I'll give them credit for the staging and the filming of that scene in that episode where they replay everything in reverse, so she sort of runs back into the room, and we see him instead of taking the key, he's putting the key back there, where it will be there in time. They're rolling the film backwards. I was impressed by that. While busy picking my jaw off the floor of all the other insane things that happened.
Hey, you said something nice about it.
Yes, I did.
How do we get
I'm not
here?
made of stone. Boy, I mean, I could go on all day. I mean, it's Yesterday's Enterprise. Any other thoughts about Yesterday's Enterprise?
The last way it feels like a movie is that it does what the good Star Trek and like movies like this that it's trying to make you think of a little bit, is that it's got like a good ensemble. Like everyone kind of gets a little thing. I guess a lot of episodes are like that, but you know, Worf's thing in the beginning, even though he's not in the episode, that's very nice. But then comparing it to Final Countdown again, I think their scenes were more convincing of when they're talking about what to do. Like both of them had that where they're sort of debating, but maybe it's just because I know these characters better. But it's like, you know, you had Beverly kind of making the appeal as the doctor of like, we shouldn't send these people to die, and you had Geordi's scene where he's doing some of the action while, you know, everyone kind of got a cool moment, you know. And so it's just a very action-packed and character... all the characters were, like, front and center.
Yeah, I liked how when they were doing the conference room scene and Picard is trying to explain, like, the concept of what's happened and how they could fix things if they send this ship back, you know, and that they're in an alternate timeline, and how Riker is just practically is like, no, they're the alternate timeline. Do you know what I mean? Like what you're talking about is altering the past. You're already talking our past. You want to alter our past. He's the one guy who says, like, we won't exist anymore. And like, nobody really brings that up. And that's something that like, you've got alternate timelines, you've got changing the world, you've got, you know, multiversal stories that we're seeing in a lot of media now. Nobody ever thinks about the fact that if you change the past, when the changes are wiped away, do those people die? And is that version of somebody, are you killing somebody? Are you destroying an entire universe of trillions of people? I just think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, they could have mixed that in too.
Riker's on, but of course that would slow the episode way down. But Riker's just like, wait a minute, they're the alternate universe. We're the real ones. Yeah, I like that.
It adds some weight to it all too. The decision. Yeah.
And it's driven home by the scene right after when Data and Tasha are in the turbo lift, and he sets the stakes. You know, he makes it clear that, like, you know, the Klingons were at war with them, but they respect honor. So this could actually work. Like if we die for the Klingons, it would be important. And she realizes later that when Guinan says that she had an empty death, which is maybe a little unfair, that her death could have meaning. Yeah, it ties together. 4 different writers. It ties together. Oh, technically 5. Michael Piller also contributed, but you can only credit 4 writers on a TV script. So.
Oh, that's so. Wow.
So yes, as the big boy head writer, he did that for his writers, and I think that's pretty cool.
Well, maybe he stewed them all together. You know.
Yes, he is the broth.
Exactly.
Brings all the ingredients together. Well, there is technology of our present in the 1940s, and of course, technology of the early 23rd century and the later 23rd century in this episode. And technology is what makes a Trek story a Trek story. It facilitates what the characters are doing. Just as often, it's the complication that they're dealing with. So on every show, we randomly pick from a list of Star Trek technologies. We add what we get to the non-Trek media and subtract it from the Trek episode to see how each is different. We call this our technological exchange. And here's the list of technologies that we choose from. We've got phasers, holodecks, tricorders, transporters, warp drives, replicators, communicators, shields, advanced medical technology, and androids. And when you've got 4 time periods, it always makes your exchange difficult. But I'll roll on my random number selecting device, and I come up with... Dice hates us. Number 5, warp drives. If warp drives exist in the final countdown, how are things different?
Warp ships. That's awesome.
You've got your warp ships, Gooey. They're invisible. It's the Philadelphia experiment.
Well, that would be a great twist. Okay, what if you make a movie where it's like, we're going to send these guys back in time on purpose because our ships can go beat their ships. You know, they can sort of be like the Krenim or whatever in Voyager.
Okay, yeah.
But then you get there, and secretly, the Japanese have even more powerful technology.
They've been working on their own thing.
They can't time travel, but they've got warp, and you don't have warp.
Yeah. I think we need to keep a sense of proportion too, right? So yes, obviously warp technology who knows how long it takes to improve it. But if there's 40 years of difference, then the 1940s armies and navies would have, 1940s level, maybe like steampunk warp technology. And then the 80s would have like integrated circuit, like cyberpunk warp technology. So their warps are faster. So the Nimitz is coming back with a bunch of warp ships that can outclass the warp ships. And all I've done is just like recreated the final countdown, I guess. Here's something else. Maybe Martin Sheen would understand more about time travel because, as we know, like warp theory is about warping space. It's about warping your sense of time, your experience of time. So maybe maybe you're right. Maybe this would be less of a natural phenomenon and really like an attempt by the present forces to influence what happens in the past. Maybe because of a bootstrap paradox, Tideman, aka, Owens, the CAG, is, he wants to go back and either ensure something happens in the past or make a change, let America win faster the war in the 40s. And so he has developed his Tideman Corporation that, gives the warp technology to the American military, and then he's going to send them back in the past to kick the asses of the Japanese in the 40s.
Oh, so he brought it upon them.
It is like the Tomorrow War, the Chris Pratt movie that everybody loves.
Yes, I love that movie.
Only in the Tomorrow War, it is. I didn't see it, so it's like aliens attack the planet in the future, and so future people have invented time travel. They take people that they know will die before they bring them to the future, so it doesn't affect the timeline, and they employ them to fight the aliens in the future, which seems like a lot of work, but whatever.
That's some like Xindi style stuff, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is some Xindi stuff. Which, look, I'm being ungenerous to Picard season 2. I'm sure if we go back and look at Enterprise with the fine-tooth comb, it doesn't work at all. Like the fact that we don't even know who's the shadowy man that's in charge of the temporal Cold War. We don't even know. So, yeah, look, it's Star Trek.
That's why we need season 5.
Season 5
to make it make sense,
or a movie at least. How come? There you go. Remember, you never really watched Battlestar Galactica, did you?
I've seen a little bit.
Got to rectify that someday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at one point, these shows are expensive, but Sci-Fi, the network, was committed to making more of these. And sometimes they were like, the writers wanted to like do another season, but they're like, what if you just took the best parts of that season and we just did a movie? And so they had like a couple movies that would sort of like fill out parts of the story. If Paramount wants to be a big dick streaming network, why can't they just set aside, $20 million and make like a Rachel Garrett movie, or make a checking in with Admiral Archer, 20 years on type movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
A movie event that would get subscribers to subscribe.
Because I guess this is like a show too, but that reminds me too of like, we got
no more
Kenobi.
of this short trek chicken shit. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, they have to sell ads on it. So of course that movie will become a 6 or 8 hour miniseries. But even that I would take.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, if we remove warp drives, and presuming that the setting can still exist, removing warp drives from the Yesterday's Enterprise episode, what do we get?
Oh boy. It would be the war would be much more difficult.
So generally we apply it as broadly as possible. So warp drive in this case just means the type of FTL travel that you see in the Star Trek universe. So warp fields or trajectors, whatever they use. Like the Romulans use a singularity drive instead of a matter reaction. None of that works. So it's either conventional rocketry or maybe they could have stargates or something like that. I don't know.
Okay, so there would still be some of that.
Do you think it's weird that nobody helps in either case? Like, the Enterprise C responds to the distress call in Narenda, and it's under attack. And then later, in the war-torn future of the alternate timeline, the Enterprise D is attacked by Klingon ships, and nobody comes to their aid. In both cases, it's like a ship alone. And I know that, obviously, the budget concerns sometimes constrain who can show up, but is it really like they can go faster than light and communicate faster than light, and like no distress call is ever answered in time. Like nobody ever shows up to like help team up on a ship. Like it's always the Enterprise is kind of has to deal with everything on its own. And I think that's probably a side effect of just the storytelling on a TV show. But you'd hope that like somebody would respond to one of these distress calls someday. It's not always just the Enterprise showing up with its dick in its hand.
Well, I feel like they always do a decent job of being like, they're 4 hours away or something like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So
well, there's a great
the scale.
Yeah, that's true. 'Cause I've always thought that there has to be like millions of ships in Starfleet, right? Like if you're exploring this entire wedge of the galaxy, and there's probably billions of personnel, but even so, the distances involved would preclude a lot of people arriving in time. Of course, you get a great example of arriving in time thanks to the sort of shortening of distances that you get in the films when the USS Excelsior shows up to help out the Enterprise in Star Trek VI in the climactic battle against Chang's prototype. Yeah,
I would assume there's like a lot of smaller ships that like max go warp 5 or something, you know.
That's true. Also, you could have like interdictor ships, right? So you could have a ship that is like I know Voyager is like a multi-purpose vessel, but a ship like Voyager that can go warp 9.99 and is just full of torpedoes. And so if anybody's in trouble, it just, moves the nacelles up, blasts out, and just shows up and just, blows up anything that's causing a problem. Of course, Starfleet, that's not their first response, but you still need to have military superiority.
Oh yeah, they've got a couple of those, I'm sure. You even had like it recently where we talked about First Contact, like there was like a lead up for them to get to Wolf 359,
Yeah.
It's probably the farther out, I guess we're kind of to believe they're on like outposts, like on the edge of their zone.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what Narenda is, or it's a Klingon outpost at least. Mm. I think that the scale would be smaller. Obviously, like we said, the setting has to exist still, so it's not like it's taking place on one planet, although that might be possible. So it would be closer to Earth, possibly like on the border of like Federation and Klingon space. And the time distances would be longer. So you'd have to presume in the scenario that, you're kind of suggesting that the Enterprise in the prime timeline, Enterprise C, is destroyed. The Romulans run off, like the cowards they are. And then Federation support ships show up and there's just like the C is destroyed and Narenda is devastated, but there's people there to say, no, they helped us, right? But in the case of slower travel, you might not know, or there might be, legends about what happened. It might the information might travel slowly as well, and it might be very less distinct as to what exactly happened. And so I don't know. Maybe there would be in the future, 22 years in the future, which isn't that long when you think about it. Maybe it wouldn't be a full scale war, but maybe the tensions would still, be brewing still. Maybe there would be more unrest and unease because we're not exactly sure what happened to that colony because nobody could get there in time to really see what happened. It's kind of like in the first season of TNG when something's scooping colonies off of planets and we don't know what it is. And we just assume it's the Borg because we meet them later. But like they met the Borg because Q sent them to the Delta Quadrant, right? Were the Borg already in the Delta or the Alpha Quadrant? Is that what was going on?
I think
who's scooping all those colonies?
I think they kind of make it make sense in Voyager when it's like, oh, they have like these little transwarp hubs.
Conduits, yeah.
And they're like, yeah, well,
but
they're probably just sending out, like if 7 of 9 could get assimilated that early, they were sending out someone, but you probably think of like who were they concentrating on in that time? Maybe they had other assimilation plans.
Yeah, it would. Until they met somebody like Picard, and they were like, "Oh no, here's the deal: we get a guy like that, and then we can just have him like talk them into giving up." It would preserve the kind of frontier feeling of a lot of Star Trek, which is, like we said, there's just something in the middle of nowhere. You can call for help, but it'll be days before anybody shows up. When somebody does show up, you're gone, and they don't know what happened. And
yeah.
a lot of TOS episodes are like that. They just roll up to a planet and they're like, what happened here?
Right. So yeah, I guess because that part of the fact that like they don't know about the Enterprise C does make it feel like, then sending them back does make a difference. But if it's like, I don't know, I guess that it just works for like explaining the time travel plot. But if it was like, you're going back, but also they don't remember, that might be harder to convey like what actually happened, I guess.
It's cool. It gets you around the problem of trying to introduce and explain. You were talking before about, reading the Romulan blog or whatever to get all the background on what is supposed to be happening in this season, like stuff that's not delivered, diegetically on screen. And they invent the Enterprise C in this episode, don't they? Like a ship that we didn't know anything about. I think it was kind of bold for them. They just did the math in terms of years, but to go from NC 1701A in the films and just go, it's the D now. It could have been the B, but we said, no, there'd be some other ones. And they left themselves like room to grow. And so in this episode, they introduce an entirely new Enterprise that we should get really excited about as viewers, an entirely new captain of the Enterprise post Cameron from Ferris Bueller's. And they don't have to actually explain anything about it because the Enterprise crew that interacts with them the entire time has no idea they ever existed. You know what I mean? I mean, they know that they were like a ship of the line back in the day, but they don't know their fates. Presumably in the regular timeline, everybody would remember on our Enterprise D the heroic sacrifice of the Enterprise C at Narendra 3.
Right. Yeah.
Picard's got a model of it in his ready room, right? And so they can get around all that by having a crew with silver belts that go across their chests that have never heard of like any of these people. And I think that's really cool. And then the episode ends without them having to explain anything. It just says, chew on that, fans, and we're going to be back next week with something else.
Exactly, yeah.
I really missed that part of Star Trek.
So how would you...
All right, I'm done complaining.
Okay.
What?
I was going to say, how would you do it if you were going to have the ending where they go back and they do the thing, but no one remembers it, how would you make that have stakes?
That's my dream then. So my dream is we start and it's... you see like a crew member. We'll focus on the crew members in Nicholas Meyer style. Give us the little people,
Okay.
And they're talking about like loving working on the Enterprise and stuff like that. And they come out onto the bridge and it's totally different. And then we zoom around to the captain's chair and we see it's Captain Garrett, right? And then her tactical officer, Lieutenant Castillo, is like, there's Romulans off the port bow or whatever. And they go through this portal. The ship's going to be destroyed. We don't know who these people are, where they are, why they're wearing the maroon uniforms. They go through the wormhole and we see, we see the Enterprise D. And then everything kind of goes the same way, but it's different. The Enterprise D people have weird silver belts on and all the lights are off. What's going on? And we play it all pretty much the same. But then when the Enterprise D puts everybody back on the C and they go through the thing, as they're going through the wormhole, they see behind them the Enterprise D explode, and they're all dead. And they come back into their future or their past. Then we play out the battle and you can have a climactic battle where they acquit themselves well, but they're still defeated. And the Romulans come on board and they drag, Castillo dies. They drag Yar away. And it's sad, but there's something. There's something we see in her eyes that, she made the right choice. And that if she dies, it was a good death. And maybe, I don't know, as a sop, we can do a prune juice thing, flash forward to the future and show that everybody's okay on the Enterprise D. But I want to see it from the Enterprise C's side.
Oh, like changing the POV.
Yeah. So it is an episode where, and Star Trek loves to do this and actors love to do this, where they get to play somebody different, but there isn't even like you wouldn't do this in 1980, 1990 on TV. Now I think that you could do this a little bit where you just assume the audience, will get it. But yeah, we see a completely different crew, and that's the only time that we see our crew is when they are alternate timeline people. And we're just following Tasha Yar. That should be the reveal character, actually, not Garrett, Tasha Yar, where we see, which they kind of do in this episode. It's a great match where they switch timelines and he turns around and reveals the tactical officer as Yar, and then they show us we're back in the present when he does the same thing and it's Worf again.
Yeah, that is cool. And I love your pitch. I can totally see like them all doing like their own logs and stuff too to really make it feel like
Yeah.
it's the Enterprise C show.
Captain Picard's battle log, or whatever he says in the episode. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be cool if like instead
Combat date.
it's doing the Enterprise C's logs, like
Sure.
yeah, and then you make it feel like you're watching a show based on them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And then it's a backdoor pilot too. So it's like
Yes.
people like that, then we can get a little Enterprise C show going on. Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Fixing problems left and right. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get a flow chart out and work on my Picard Season 2 time travel chart. But in the meantime, let's tell people what's coming up on the next episode of Backtrekking.
Yes, our next one, it's a little different, but season early episode fans may remember this type of thing. We're talking about MF Doom, and we're kind of going to be talking about him generally, but there's going to be a lot of Star Trek connections for those who remember our Beastie Boys episode. Be similar to that.
Really liked doing the Beastie Boys episode and learned a lot about them, and had not really been much of a Beastie Boys fan, just didn't really have an opinion about them, but learned to really appreciate them, and surprised at how nerdy they were and Star Trek-y they were. And it turns out MF Doom is probably twice the Star Trek nerd that they are put together and rapped about. I mean, of course, the guy looks like Dr. Doom, so he's definitely a nerd, but also somebody who has been described, I've seen this a lot, as your favorite rapper's rapper.
Oh, yeah,
A rapper who other rappers look at and go, man, if I could be like that. And of course, unfortunately passed away in 2020, suddenly, unexpectedly. And so we'll be honoring him and his love of sci-fi and Star Trek on our next episode.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a good one.
But that's it for this week's Backtrekking, and thanks for listening, everybody. If you like the show, tell a friend. You can follow us at @Backtrekking on Twitter, and tell us, too, what you think that we should look at in future episodes. And Gooey, tell the people where they can find you online.
You can find me, I'm on Twitter, I'm at GUIFame.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter at @KA1IBAM, and you can find all of the shows and programs and content on the Just Enough Trope Network at @JustEnoughTrope on Twitter. And that's it for us for this week. We're signing off. See you soon, and keep on trekking.